Hi, my name's Amanda. I am CEO and founder of EOS Network, Eosinophilic Diseases Charity. So EOS Network's journey began back in 2003 when our son was born and he had complex skin and gastro conditions and eventually was diagnosed at the age of 7 months with eosinophilic gastrointestinal disease. Now, back then, there was very limited information regarding eosinophilic diseases. And in fact, actually, all we got was a one-page journal after much pressing to try and find out more information, explaining some symptoms around what we was dealing with. And I can remember the bottom one said, feeling of impending doom, which, you know, when you've got a 7-month-old baby, no one really knows what that means. Now, because of this limited knowledge, eventually we reached out to Cincinnati, where there was some research happening. And we travelled out to meet some of the professionals then, and we learned that actually we weren't the only ones who were living with this condition. And that was in 2004. By 2006, we came back and started a Yahoo support group for parents who had children with complex conditions like ours. And there was really very limited knowledge then about it being a chronic disease, and so it was predominantly families that we were supporting. The following year, our daughter was born, and unbeknown to us that this would be a family problem, she also was diagnosed with eosinophilic disease by the time she was 6 months. Hindsight was a wonderful thing, and we managed the condition very early on, but actually it was very soon obvious to us that she was suffering with the same symptoms. And of course, by then we were reaching out to more families, and the organisation that started off as a Yahoo support group had evolved into a charity. And by 2010, we were registered in the UK, and we were supporting around about 250 families who were living with the challenges the same as us. Now, there was a big gap now between 2010 and 2018 where we were really focusing on trying to manage what was quite a complex time for us. But actually, it was very obvious to us that there was an acute need during this period for increasing expertise, because it was very difficult to find somebody to help support in the problems that you were facing medically. And so in 2018, connecting with other professionals that we already knew in the US and here in the UK, we realised that these professionals were actually just as isolated as us as patients in connecting with other professionals around the world. And so we relaunched EOS Network as it is today, and we're going to tell you more about how professionals and patients connect as I work through this presentation with you. So, who we are today? Well, our mission is to ensure that every person with an eosinophilic associated disease receives a prompt, accurate diagnosis, cohesive medical care and support to live with their condition. It's a big mission. So currently our reach is that we're a registered charity with a global multidisciplinary medical advisory board and trustees. We have a network of 690 healthcare professionals across 58 countries, and that's growing. I think it's up to 60 already since we developed this presentation. And we have around 1,500 registered community members with us who are receiving regular contact from us. Our website reaches a much wider audience than this. We have 5,000 new website visitors a month, and that reaches over 160 countries. So how are we connecting with other professionals? So we work as patient representatives within the UEG ESPGHAN, which is the European Society for Paediatric Gastroenterology, the European Society for Gastroenterology, and also the European Society for Allergy and Clinical Immunology, and the UK organisations for the equivalent of those, and of course the European Reference Network as well. We work with other multiple stakeholders, medical institutes, research centres, policymakers and industry to improve patient outcomes. And we provide the patient public and involvement in various different research studies to ensure that the patient's voice is heard throughout. We've currently published, co-authored 20 published papers, including EOE and EGID guidelines and research, and recommended improvement position papers for eosinophilic associated diseases. So how do we improve things? So patient empowerment is actually one of the key things that we do. So if you can be empowered to manage your own condition, it's very, very important. And we do this through regular patient support meetings. We provide downloadable resources, and we put on educational events covering all sorts of topics from eosinophilic gastrointestinal diseases and the associated problems with asthma and various other conditions such as hypereosinophilic syndrome, and obviously dealing with the biopsies, histology, pathology, and various other topics such as diet. We hold an awareness campaign every year, and we hold it for the whole of month of May because it's such a huge topic. And this year, I'm very excited to say we had our largest reach yet. We managed to reach 81,000 new people, and alongside it, this had an outgoing reach of impressions of activity of nearly 270,000. How did we do this? We did this by developing a campaign toolkit. We've done this several years running now, so that it actually doesn't increase the burden on the people participating. We provide them with tools, and that runs from social media tools so they can share the message in a uniform way, events, t-shirts, and many, many other things that happen throughout the month. And here's just a highlight of the people that have been involved with us this year. We actually had a huge amount of participation, and we did this through 37 partners, covering various people from other patient organisations, other rare disease organisations, and various other stakeholders, industry and beyond, and obviously all the medical institutes that we work with too. So how do we do all of this? It all sounds very exciting. Let's tell you a little bit more about what we do. So we have two halves to the organisation, which I alluded to earlier on in the presentation. That involves our community hub, so all of our patients, carers and families. And alongside this, we have our healthcare professional network. We work with many different organisations. Initially, a lot of the work we did was within rare disease. As we now know, EOE is no longer recognised as a rare disease, now that it's 1 in 700. But actually many of the other diseases are still in the rare collection. And so we work with organisations around the globe covering those common topics. We also work with patient organisations around the world, whether they're local or national patient organisations, to provide nice support from everybody. And then we develop patient resources using that patient experience and participation to help improve management of the condition. We also are involved in global research. That means that we can help with organisations and collaborate and innovate on the research that's happening. And then, of course, all importantly, it doesn't matter how good the research is, if no one hears about it, it's not going to make a difference. So we also help disseminate that information via our platform, and of course medical education alongside that as well. And this is done via the many different associations that we've already spoken about previously, and then helping to make sure that every piece of work that happens is patient-centred by involving our patient community. And then, of course, we work with industry in research and development of new treatments, recruitment with patients. And the last piece of the puzzle is, of course, working with medical bodies that ensure that you get access to these treatments, which obviously is a key part to improving patients' outcomes. Now, this is an incredibly busy slide, which is actually the point of the slide. It just demonstrates to you how we are in the centre and the glue of connecting all of these important moving parts, ultimately to improve patients' experience and outcomes. So to give you a few insights on how we understand what our community's needs are. So this is some data back from 2021. We looked at our community to how long it took them to get diagnosed with EOE, and actually we found that a third of our community took 10 years plus, which is a huge concern. It averages overall at 8 years and is still battering around this same sort of figure with not much improvement. So we started to ask questions as to why this might be. Now, these are common sayings that actually, if you have EOE yourself or you have a patient with EOE, then this is something you would have heard from them. This is something that happens towards the end of having the condition. So when you've already got that dysphagia, feeling the food sticking, chewing loads with your food, getting embarrassed about eating in front of others, and drinking lots of water. But of course, this is when the symptoms have already got to this point, and what we'd like to do is step in before it gets that bad. So when we started to ask our community what happens before, they mentioned to us that this is a big problem with entering the healthcare system and exiting it, sadly, at many different places. So they talked to us about their general practitioner in primary care, where they may go to them and then exit out the system, through paediatrics, and then eventually transitioning into adult care. There can be a problem in getting lost there. Gastroenterology and nutrition, if the healthcare professional doesn't know about the disease. In pathology, where there is still inconsistencies around the globe in looking at these biopsies because it still requires that manual input. Through emergency care, when having food bolus obstructions and entering A&E in the middle of the night and not being aware of the disease. And often in the middle of the night, it's the ear, nose and throat people that get called rather than necessarily gastroenterology, and maybe biopsies aren't taken. In pulmonology, and that's because many of our patients, when we spoke to them, also suffer with other atopic conditions, and around about 80% of those have one or more atopic condition, often being asthma. And this isn't being picked up as in asthma clinics, that maybe if they've got swallowing difficulties, it could be EOE. And then, of course, allergy, as we know, is a common crossover with eosinophilic diseases as well, whether they have immediate allergies or non-immediate allergies. And so how could we change this? Originally, we focused a lot of our energy in gastroenterology, and we realised that actually it's a much wider problem than just gastroenterology. So we worked with our fellow patient organisations and with industry partners to develop this tool, which is could it be EOE, looking at the wider signs and symptoms in hoping to pick up patients much earlier than that dysphagia stage. And this has been massively well received as a tool, both within public and professional settings and patient settings. To follow this up, we've also collaborated on a position paper looking and advocating for improved global awareness and care for eosinophilic esophagitis, and this will be being rolled out throughout 2026. And so, listening to all of the challenges that are faced by our community, I'd also like to talk to you now about how patient advocacy can make a difference, and we're going to talk about Fergus's story. So Fergus was born in 2003, and in his early days as a baby, he was exposed to postnatal antibiotics. He had a family history of allergy-related conditions. His mum actually was an experienced nurse, and ironically was an experienced nurse in endoscopy, but didn't know about EOE. He had first allergy concerns were identified very early on at weaning stage when he started to fail to thrive due to vomiting. He had the atopic problem, so he had eczema, skin issues. He also had other multiple life-threatening allergies and was on a highly restricted diet, in fact, only tolerating baby rice, pear and cooked apple. So he was quite a complicated baby. And by the age of 4, he'd started to develop the other atopic family members, if you like, of asthma and chronic rhinitis, and was also struggling with reflux and regurgitation. So this is not an uncommon story, although quite complex for people with EOE, and those who have EOE knowledge will recognise that. Growing up, he was, by the time he was age of 8, he started to find it difficult to swallow sandwiches. And in a normal child, not necessarily picked up, but when you start to piece the puzzle together, it starts to make more sense. By the time he was 8, he'd had headaches, he had abdominal pain, he started to be sick quite a lot, and he's drinking lots of water when eating his food. By 14, he had an incident when he thought he was choking, an ambulance was called, and then he regurgitated on a lump of meat. And by 15, he had a lower gastrointestinal flare, which included some bleeding. So his story is starting to get more and more complicated, but in each isolation of their own, it's not necessarily something that's picked up as a major problem, just when you piece the pieces of the puzzle together. And by 17, somebody did piece the pieces of the puzzle together, and he had a food obstruction, and biopsies were taken, thank goodness, at this point. And so, no surprise, by the time he was 17, in fact, in December 2020, Fergus receives a diagnosis, and they say he's got EOE, and he also had duodenal ulcer at the same time. So his mum, being a healthcare professional, she gets online and she starts looking for a recognised organisation for valuable information that's bona fide, and she finds us. And so they reach out for one-to-one support. And even though we had conversations, he was still struggling with lots and lots of symptoms, and in fact was still bouncing in regularly in and out of hospital. By now they tried proton inhibitors such as omeprazole, he was on oral topical steroids, he'd cut more foods out of his diet, they were struggling with pain relief. And actually the problem was all of these things, they might have worked for a bit, they didn't work for long, and none of them were massively effective, sadly. By 2021, no surprise, this was impacting his entire family. Because if someone's sick and they're chronically sick, anybody living with that, they'll know that it goes beyond the individual that it's affecting. Because he's already restricted diet, he actually was already had a bad relationship with food, was concerned, but by now his food, every time he eats food, he's frightened he's going to get stuck because he's already experienced this several times. He's drinking lots and lots of water with every meal, and he's not eating out at all because he's so worried. He's in a constant mental battle with getting up in the morning because he's in pain all of the time. And his family reach out to us again for some further support and come along to some of our community chat meetings to meet others, to not feel so isolated in living with the condition. And in fact, Fergus suggests to his doctor, because his doctor hasn't seen many patients with this condition, he says, did you know that they actually have a professional network? And so his doctor joins our network too. Fergus has downloaded by this point the tools and resources that we have developed along the way. This includes the symptom tracker, the action plan for food bolus obstruction, which he said was particularly beneficial to him to be able to explain to the people in A&E when you're definitely not feeling at your best, what's going on for him and what he needed, and to be taken seriously. And alongside this, some information that he could provide others, such as his college and family. So there starts to be a question about whether this could be just in his esophagus or not, because although they're treating it, he's still symptomatic. He's, by now in 2022, he's on a diet restriction of 6 foods or more. So that's your egg, dairy, soya, fish, nuts, and wheat. And alongside this, he's also taking omeprazole and the oral topical steroids as well. And he actually is scoped, and they find that the eosinophils have reduced below the threshold of diagnosis of 15 per high power field. So what's going on? He's still bouncing in and out of hospital with continued gastro symptoms. And so they have another look inside and they take more biopsies to see what's going on. And poor Fergus, by this point, he is at university. He's desperate to get his degree, but he's finding that he's so sick that he's often debilitated to his bed and having to work from there, which is the reality of having a chronic illness such as this. And alongside him having his diagnosis, at this point, his younger female cousin is also diagnosed with EOE. And the reason why this is significant, because it's often said that it's predominantly boys that have this condition, but actually it's girls too. And yes, there is a familiar connection between other members of the family. So Fergus by now is a young man who desperately wants to speak for himself. He wants to advocate for his needs, and he wants to be in control of what's happening with his healthcare plan. And, you know, going in and out of hospital when you're trying to do a degree is, you know, having an agreed treatment plan is incredibly valuable. And he manages to achieve this with his doctor because he comes along to our webinars and learns about the condition himself, to be able to ask the right questions and to understand what treatments are effective and when. So how could all of this and the work that we're doing improve an outcome for Fergus? So in 2023, we managed to connect his healthcare professional to a world expert within our network of professionals, and they discuss his case. They take a look at his scopes and decide that actually he has an additional diagnosis of eosinophilic duodenitis and eosinophilic gastritis. So it's not just the EOE that Fergus is facing, and this is a much less common condition than EOE. So less understood and limited guidelines. So expert opinion was incredibly valuable in this. They decide to put him on a course of systemic steroids for short-term relief, and an application is made for dupilumab for a 12-month trial, because where he lives, actually this has not been approved as a treatment for under the NHS, and so a special application had to be made, although it's approved for efficacy and safety in many countries. He's put on a 12-month trial, and actually it's added to his existing treatments of oral topical steroids and proton pump inhibitors. And not just his GI symptoms improve, this condition has been approved for many other treatments as well. And as an allergic type person, many other symptoms improved alongside, such as his skin, his breathing, his lungs and nose. And I think his comment was he could breathe through his nose for the first time. And of course, ultimately his quality of life improves. Dupilumab was given to him only as a 6-month trial after this to see if they could wean him off the other treatments, but this wasn't effective. And of course, by now we're at the end of the 12-month trial, which had been applied for. And of course, what do you do for long-term treatment? And of course, it requires independent advocacy from his healthcare professional. Symptoms soon returned during the period of advocacy for the longer term treatment. In fact, within 2 months, he was back almost to where he started. But good news is that actually at age 22, long-term treatment was agreed as exceptional circumstances, and Fergus had effective treatment. And in fact, actually, he was put back on the combination therapy. And the good news of the story, which we are all hanging in there to hear, is that he completed his degree. And in fact, he's got a job. He's just been promoted, and he's moved out home. He's now living independently and working well towards his objectives for future life. And in fact, ultimately, he's become a keen advocate for what we do in supporting both our work and helping other community members alongside his family. And this is where it comes full circle in patient involvement in what we're doing. So Fergus's family alongside him have become passionate advocates, volunteers and fundraisers. They've been involved in participating in focus groups, providing valuable insights to research alongside, and are absolute stars in our eyes for sure, alongside many others of our community members. And we're very grateful for the work that they do. And in return, they are very grateful for the work that we do, and we're delighted to be here to support our community. And so ultimately, what I'd like to say to you, our vision is a world where lives are no longer inhibited and controlled by eosinophilic associated diseases. And that means for all. We don't want this just to be a story for Fergus, and that we hope eventually this will be a story for everyone. I'd like to thank all of our donors, partners and sponsors for whom, without your support and help, none of this would be possible. And of course, ultimately, your support is absolutely vital. And we hope that you will continue to support us for many of our community who, of course, as we can see, this little person here is on a lifetime journey of eosinophilic diseases. Thank you.